Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Dino, and being December 16th here in southwestern Ontario, I really should be getting ready for the snowmobile season. But it's 10 degrees Celsius outside today. It's unreasonably warm, so I'm going to take advantage and do one final repair on my friend's Yamaha Bruin, and that is changing out a front CV shaft. So why don't you sit back, grab yourself something warm or maybe cold to drink, enjoy Dino's Tinker Shed. I might have to come up with a different one-liner at the beginning here if the temperature doesn't get colder. I'll see you in a minute. Well, you may notice that today I am wearing the t-shirt that my friend Eric over at the Lonely Overlander gave me after I helped him out with a couple projects on his previous Ford Bronco. And I'm wearing it because he's had some exciting news on his channel. For the last 6 months since his Bronco was damaged, he's been waiting to figure out what he's going to do in terms of a replacement vehicle. And he's finally got a VIN number for a brand new Ford Bronco Heritage Edition. So in another 8 to 10 weeks, he might be picking that Bronco up and starting to build it, and in the not too distant future produce some really nice cinematic overland adventures on his channel, The Lonely Overlander. But let's take a look now at what we're going to work on today. This 2004 Yamaha Bruin 350 is a great ATV, especially if you're starting out in the world of ATVs, or maybe you're a smaller or younger rider that's just learning how to ride. It's lightweight, has lots of power, and it has an automatic transmission that's really easy to use. But like many four-wheel drive ATVs, one of the weak points is down below here on the front CV shafts. These CV shafts do a lot of flexing as the front tires turn and the suspension articulates. And eventually, the CV boots that protect the joint inside will wear out and tear or just rip clean off. In this case, the left-hand side interior CV boot has torn, and it looks like it's been ridden on for a number of months because the CV joint's pretty contaminated with grit and sand, and the grease looks pretty dry in there. Now, we could replace the CV joints. There are kits on the market that let you do this, but I think that the better option is just to replace the drive shaft completely for a couple reasons. The first reason is because the CV joint is pretty full of dirt and debris. Even if I clean that out, re-grease it with some new Moly lube, there's already a little bit of slop in there, and more than likely the joint's going to prematurely fail. The other reason is a single boot is $30, and if you have the CV joint off already, you might as well do both of them. So you're looking at around $60 Canadian, and that includes the CV boots, the band clamps, and usually the Moly grease that you fill these with. So for $60 you get new boots but old joints. I bought this replacement CV joint, complete with axles, boots, everything, for $98 Canadian. So for an additional $30, we have brand new ball joints or CV joints in there, new boots, and new clamps, new grease, new everything. Many people might say that these are Chinese-built offshore CV joints, and yes, they are. The shafts definitely are made in China. But I do think they're fairly high quality, and compared to the contaminated joint that's down here, it's a much wiser and easier job to do this. So today we're going to take that old joint out, put the new joint in, and then I can get this motorcycle or ATV back to my friend Anthony, and he can have his kids out riding around relatively soon. So let's get to work. I'm just going to place some wheel chocks so that the bike doesn't roll here as I take the wheel off, and I'll use a heavy 1/2-inch ratchet to break the lug nuts free. Once that's done, I'll use my ATV jack just to lift the front end up, and I want to keep the A-arms here open so I can work in this area. Now I have an impact gun, so I'll just zip off the rest of the lug nuts here. You don't need this, but it's a handy tool to have. And once I get the wheel off, I do notice just that the brakes, like many ATVs, are packed with mud. So I'll just use a screwdriver here and then some compressed air to clean out around the pads and all of the fasteners. And once this is done, well, I'm going to do what I do a lot of, which is sweep the floor. I like to keep things clean, and I sweep the floor a lot. Don't tell my wife. Now, the next thing is to get this rubber cap off, and it just pries off here with a little bar you can see. And underneath is this castle nut that's retained with a cotter pin. I'll pry up on the cotter pin using a set of side cutters, and then use this mechanic's pick just to pull it out enough that I can get a grip on it with those side cutters. Now these are way better than using needle nose pliers or journeyman pliers because they bite nice and tight on the cotter pin and let you walk it out with that levering motion. It's a really good thing to use. There's your cotter pin. Great tools. Now, I figured I would just use my impact gun and zip this off, but my battery was getting a little bit low, so, I tried and it just would not break that castle nut free. So what I did is I took myself a toe strap from a pair of bicycle pedals and wrapped it around the front brake lever here. These are very handy tools to have in your inventory. I don't even know if they're easy to buy anymore, but I'm sure you can buy these on Amazon. They work better than a zip tie because you can reuse them. Once that's applied, I just use that same large ratchet and break that castle nut free. Once it's free, it spins off relatively easily, allowing me to also remove this heavy washer, and I'll just set these aside for use later on. Next, I'm going to remove this 10mm nut here, bolt, that's retaining the front brake hose. So I'll just break that free, and then I'll just sort of unthread the bolt. It works pretty easily. And you can see the little clip that gets held down with that bolt, and I'll put it back in the hole there. I also need to get the entire brake caliper off, so I'll need a 12mm socket. I'll just reach around here. It's always hard when I'm filming to get the shot, but also show you what I'm doing. So here I just break these fasteners free, and they unthread relatively simple. There you go. You can just undo them by your fingers. With the caliper undone like this, I can check the pad wear, and it looks quite good on this particular caliper. I'm sure the other side's good as well, but we'll check that later. I'm just going to tuck it up inside here out of the way so it can't fall. And we'll turn our attention to the rotor itself. With the brake caliper off, the rotor can be pulled straight out. It's on splines. And it has a machined surface here that rides on a seal on the hub itself. You're going to want to take a look at that while you've got this apart. Make sure that everything's clean, that the seal's in good condition, and nothing's torn. This one again looks really good, so we can set this up on the bench and move to the next step. That next step is to remove the steering knuckle itself. It's impossible to get the CV joint out with the knuckle still in place. Now, I'm not 100% sure with this Yamaha if I have to take all the ball joints off, or if I can just take one of the lower ones off and swing it out. But I may end up having to take off the upper, lower, and tie rod for the steering and pull the knuckle off. I also don't believe I have to take off the disc brake guard at the back here. I might do it just to make access a little easier, but I don't really think I have to. Anyway, I'm going to get to work on that now. Just like your CV joint, there's a castle nut on the bottom of the ball joints and tie rods that requires you to remove a cotter pin. And once again, these side cutters come in handy because they can get into some tight spots. In fact, for this castle nut, I didn't even need my pick. I was really able to just tap it a little bit, reach in there with those little sort of tight ends that they have and pry the cotter pin out. These really are the best tools, in my opinion, to getting cotter pins out. And you can see here, it pulls it out easy. Now, I'm just going to use a box end wrench and this dead blow hammer. One heavy whack and it breaks that castle nut free, and I'll just move it down a couple threads here. Now I'll use a crowbar, apply some tension, and hit the side of the knuckle casting. This introduces a bit of vibration and usually allows it to drop down without using a pickle fork, which can damage the boot on that tie rod, or a ball joint I should say. Now, I take the tie rod end off for the steering, and I'm able to flex the entire assembly down to the point that I can get it out of the knuckle, and then just a couple tugs and the shaft comes right out. Okay, here is the original drive shaft, and you can see the CV joints. Pretty much the boot's done. And when I rotate this, I mean, it's got to have some adjustment here, but I can feel there's a ton of dirt in there. Overall, these appear to be the same shaft. I'm just going to open this up so we can get a better look. But these do appear to be pretty much identical. There's a rubber O-ring here that I think I need to put over onto this side. But on this end, the circlip is in there, the same as this one. They both have that locking ring. And that's when you pull the shaft out, that locking ring is what sort of holds it in place. So I think we're good to go here. These feel good. They sound good. They're super tight. I am going to see if the castle nut from the original can go onto this shaft. This one doesn't have a castle nut. You can see it is drilled for a cotter pin, but the original is nicely machined on the end, whereas this one's sort of threaded all the way to the end, and then the threads are just machined down, probably to save money. This one's also nicely black anodized, which may be that it's hardened, I'm not sure, a little bit differently than this one. But overall, the machined surfaces on this one look really good as well. So let's get this put back in. Essentially, we're just going to insert this back in, push it in until that C-clip on the end right here engages, and then we'll slide it all back together, and it's just the reverse process. Oh, I see. This is why. It has a locking castle cover. So I might use this instead of the original hardware. Okay, let's get this thing back into the bike. You'll probably notice a little bit of gear oil has leaked out of the differential here. It's nice and clean. I just make sure there's no dirt on the seal, and then I slide the new shaft in, making sure the splines line up. I use my soft-faced dead blow hammer to tap the splines fully in and make sure that the little C-clip engages. This one does really well. I turn my attention to adding a little bit of grease to this machined surface so it slides into the hub easily. And this is where I noticed that, well, the old shaft must really have been worn out because the new one just will not articulate enough to slide into the hub no matter what I try. Now, instead of taking the lower ball joint off, which can be a little bit more difficult when it's sort of loose like this, what I decide to do is just pull the CV shaft out of the way here and focus on the lower control arm fasteners. These are easy to take off, and once you get these out of the way, the lower control arm just lifts right out. It was really a much easier sort of thing to do. Once I slide this off, I just take the little O-ring that we talked about earlier and slide it onto the splines, and then the hub just slips right on. Remember, the splines don't line up with the hub here, but rather the rotor. Next, I reinsert the lower control arms into their pivot mounts and put in the fasteners and tighten those back up. I'll grease the hub seal here before I slide it onto the splines and push it in to seat it into the seal itself. I'll reuse the old fasteners here, and I'll just put the castle nut back on the end of the CV. Next, I need to reinstall the brake caliper, so I slide it into place, tighten up those 12mm bolts, and of course tighten down the brake line as well. And I do this so that I can reattach that toe clip strap here on the front brakes, which allows me to retorque the CV and ultimately put a new cotter pin in place and snap the cover on. And it's looking pretty good. Lastly, I'll reattach and tighten all of the ball joints, the steering tie rod end, all of that, making sure that it's nice and tight before I put the wheels back on and torque them down. And guess what? We're just done. Well, everybody, this brings today's project to a close on how to put a CV joint into one of these ATVs, and I hope you enjoyed it. This pretty much wraps up the work that I'm going to do on this ATV for now. I'm going to get it back to its home with my friend Anthony and his son Tyler, who I know is going to be out on this thing soon, cutting his teeth on how to ride one of these ATVs. So Tyler, you be safe when you're riding this thing and wear all your appropriate PPE. I realize this isn't a DR650 video or even a snowmobile video, but I do like to put different projects that I work on here in the Tinker Shed onto the channel every once in a while to see if there's interest in it. So if you like this type of content, please leave a comment down below. It'll let me know whether or not to do a bit more work on ATVs here in the shop for you, or maybe pass and focus more on the bike or the sled. Until then, you have yourself a great day. I'm going to finish sweeping up here in the shop, and until then, you tinker easy. Bye for now.